Welcome. This is a debate on media and civil society renewal in Central and Eastern Europe, part of a conference, Rethink 1999. And the conference is organized by the Open Lithuania Foundation. The Open Lithuania Foundation, in cooperation with Visegrad Insight, Respublika Foundation, College of Eastern Europe, New Eastern Europe, and it's funded by the Europe for Citizens program of the European Union. We have fantastic lineup for today's discussion, and we'll make sure to discuss with them the topic, but also to include questions and answers from you, from the audience. So please, yes, make sure that you ask your questions in the chat box of the conference portal, and we will now begin. We have today with us Thomas Kent, Associate Professor at the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. Thomas has been also chairman of the radio, director of the Radio Free Europe, or Radio Liberty. He held multiple positions through his career in the media, Associated Press, to be noted of, and many others. He's a graduate at Yale University and author of many books, some of them also focusing on Eastern Europe and the question of information and disinformation, importantly. And I'm sure Tom will tell us more about it. Welcome, Tom, to this discussion. We will need to unmute the mics each time we're speaking. We're happy also to see Ágnes Urbán, professor at Corvinus University, Budapest, media studies professor associated with and an expert of Mertek Media Monitor, a think tank based in Budapest, monitoring media situation in Central Europe. Welcome, It's very good to have you with us. And we are going to have in just a moment, when she connects to us, Hanna Liubakova, a journalist, Belarusian journalist, daily providing feeds on the developments in Belarus, also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Hanna is very present in social media and in the media, reporting on the situation in Belarus in the context of what's happening today, but broadly speaking, she's reporting on international affairs and democracy. So we begin today, and I'll my first question goes to Tom Kent, with trying to assess what's the state of media and civil society. We have seen a lot of developments recently, a lot of worrying developments. We have published, next to this conference, also a special report, Rethink 1989, looking back at the story of civil society and also partly media in this part of the world. We've been publishing also reports on the scenarios of the futures of what may happen to the media. But I think it's invaluable to have your insight into this situation, looking from a bit of a distance, but also very closely monitoring what's happening in civil society. Tom.
Fine, well, thanks, and good noon from New York. I think that civil society actually is quite vibrant in the East European area. There's certainly a lot of challenges. Dictatorial governments and repressive governments are equipped with much better tools of repression now. In Russia, for example, they're using the foreign agent laws very effectively against civil society activists there. We are challenged by the extremely well-developed techniques of disinformation. There are many concerns we can talk about later regarding funding and working with donors and so forth, size of of civil society organizations, often quite small. But I am optimistic because of the burst of pro-democracy and anti-corruption agitation that we see in many countries, from Belarus to Hong Kong to Myanmar, wherever you look. This does seem to be sort of a trend of history, and I see repressive governments and repressive regimes being repressive because they know what will happen if they do not take repressive measures. They are pushing against the tide of history, it seems to me, very successfully sometimes, but nonetheless pushing against.
So you would say you're rather optimistic looking at the trends. If you look at the trends, big picture, Central Europe, that civil society is quite vibrant. Is that something you would say?
Well, first of all, it's something I have to say, or I would never be able to get out of bed in the morning. So, I mean, I'm obviously by nature, I am optimistic, but I think that there is enough there to justify that, and we can talk, more about some of the things, other factors. But yes, on the whole, I think there are very good prospects.
We'll also come back to the question of media in a moment, but let me turn to Ágnes. And Ágnes, how's your reading of where things are going?
It will be a cheerful discussion because I'm also rather optimistic by nature. Basically, the situation is not so bad as it seems. You know that Hungary is practically the black sheep of the European Union, but not the only one. And the continuous government pressure that we experienced in the last decade, it basically energized the civil society. So they are much more visible. I mean, the NGOs are much more visible than before. I think there is a brand awareness. I think even the ordinary citizens can identify the most important civil organizations, and I think the NGOs have an impact in Hungary, not purely in negative sense, because there is a continuous government communication against the civil organizations, but they really have an impact on the public dialogue, and I think it is basically the most important in the case of civil society. And I'm basically optimistic because it is really an energized sector.
Yeah, so in a way, from what I hear from you is that well, contrary to the political trends and democratic backsliding that otherwise is reported in the region, it seems to be like, well, pretty much a pro-democratic vaccine for energizing the population. I mean, that comes at a price, and I'm very happy now that Hanna managed to join us. Hello, Hanna. Are you?
Hello, hi, sorry.
Hi,
sorry for being
Hanna. We just began, and I introduced you already. Very good to have you with us. And we begin by trying to speak our state of mind when we think civil society in Central Eastern Europe. Is it vibrant? It's on the rise, or is there a decline? Are there reasons of to be hopeful, or are there sources of optimism? Or rather, it's a worrying development when you look at the civil society. Hanna.
Right, straight to the point. Well, I think it's both. I think there are many great optimistic developments that we kind of have to pay attention to and kind of enjoy, admire. At the same time, there are obviously many worrying, alarming issues. I'm a journalist from Belarus, right? So if I may kind of speak about Belarus a little bit, because it's I think it's an example and kind of a case of study when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe as well. So So yeah, so when it comes to kind of those warring trends in terms of media, in terms of civil society, we all obviously heard about media restrictions in Belarus. This is not a new phenomenon. I have never felt safe as an independent journalist in Belarus. However, I would say that since last year, kind of real war has been unleashed against journalists in Belarus. We have been under severe attack. It also applies to civil society, actually. We all obviously heard about the level of repressions. Just kind of repeat last year, 480 times journalists were detained, and there are currently 12 journalists who remain in prison. It also applies to bloggers. It also applies to those kind of who are trying to bring about change. I'm concerned about vague laws and a weak justice system that is being used to kind of muzzle media to defy the official line. For example, since the beginning of this year, 5 press club journalists who have been detained and charged for alleged tax evasion is kind of a very striking example. And Press Club is an important organization that has been helping journalists in Belarus, and kind of they've brought many great experts to the country, and it also helps civil society. It's some sort of an ecosystem that was created thanks to Press Club. Another example is the Minsk court decision last December to revoke the media license of the online channel and website to BY. So these are kind of some sort of worries and alarming trends in the country, in Belarus, and I'm sure it applies to many of the Central and Eastern Europe countries as well. But there are also some optimistic trends which I would like to kind of focus a little bit on. I'd say that in the past years, independent outlets and social media established a virtual monopoly over people's minds. The majority of Belarusians turned away from state media that spread lies and falsehoods, especially during the pandemic. That was especially clear when social networks became a source of information about the real situation in Belarus. And that's why kind of this trend, this trust in media keeps going on, kind of continues during the protests and now. And that's something I guess is a little bit different from perhaps Western Europe, where there is, in many countries, there is kind of a high level of distrust in social media and in journalism, and it's a kind of contrary trend in my country, in Belarus, where people actually do see the value of free speech and media, and they respect independent journalists. They tried to protect us many times during protests when they surrounded us and prevented us from being detained by police, or they let us in their apartments when police arrived and wanted to detain journalists. Citizen journalism is very important as well. There's kind of a unique connection between citizens and journalists, and they see us as their allies. So it's all kind of, there is a great interconnection between this. And civil society.
Excellent, Hanna. We'll come back to that, because I mean, you have a lot to say, and definitely we want to hear you out throughout this discussion. But just that was a warming up question, and again, happy that you made it and join us. Tom, Hanna mentioned something of a general global or Western democracies decline of journalism. By comparison, you have the advantage of I'm sure looking at both sides. In the countries of Central Eastern Europe, and looking at United States, or generally whole of the Western Alliance. Do you see this? These are parallel developments, or they're part of the same? We're on the same wagon of how things are going on, in terms of civil society and media.
Well, I think some things are the same, others are different. Certainly, media everywhere are suffering economically. mainly from the impact of social networks that have taken away so much of their revenue. So that's similar in Western countries and also in Central and East Europe. Beyond that, I think that in the United States, for example, the crisis of journalism is largely a function of the news media trying to figure out what it should be, whether it should remain objective and neutral, as it has always tried to be in the past, successfully or not, or whether, in fact, it should be moving to a new, much more militant model, where similar to some countries in Europe, where we have right-wing and left-wing newspapers, and they're very different, and they present things from a very different point of view. So that's the current struggle in the U.S. media. Of course, everything's super dramatic in the United States, so we appear to be tearing ourselves apart. Whether that's really true or not, I don't know. But that's the U.S. crisis. I think in Central and East Europe, the crisis is probably, along with the economic crisis, the main issue is probably the ability of the media to operate freely, either because of repressive measures by the government, or because of their owners that require them to operate in certain ways. So these are our issues in Central and East Europe. I would add at the same time, though, that we are seeing a real flowering of media in terms of the mutual support and interconnections among media these days. If there are many projects under which media are working closely together and doing spectacular investigative work. So you take something like the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or that it and others have launched all these projects like the Panama Papers and many others that have been super sophisticated and involved many different news organizations, sometimes as many as 100 news organizations working together rather secretly. It's incredible they've been able to keep some of the secrets, and using the most advanced forms of artificial intelligence to go over large amounts of data, real cross-national collaborations that no individual government has been able to stop because the material is shared so widely among different countries. And I think that's probably the most optimistic aspect of media these days, that it is getting very transnational, and the truth always comes out, if not through one medium, through another.
Thanks. That is something to look also ahead to, where this discussion about the format of media is going. That's definitely fascinating to see, and that's not for the first time when the US might be the trendsetter in this area. But I do believe in Central and Eastern Europe, to a large extent, is also a trendsetter for good and the bad. And I think you've been studying some of that, Tom, and also publishing about it in your recent book. Also, how to counter disinformation, and where the civil society and media platforms of all sides also come together. Would you shed some light on where's the inspiration, perhaps also from Central Europe? What do you came across as an interesting development here?
Well, I think what's most interesting, if you talk about civil society, is how varied the civil society groups are. And as a matter of fact, the word civil society sort of doesn't cover it, because it can be anything. So you have civil society groups that basically campaign publicly for decent government and against corruption, and that expose disinformation. You have some that are working to defund conspiracy sites by blocking, encouraging people not to advertise on them, that are identifying and reporting disinformation networks so that the social platforms can take them down. So that's one whole area of relatively overt activity. And then on the other hand, you have groups that are out there fighting trolls, sometimes using false identities, that are penetrating chat rooms and arguing with people who are advancing conspiracy theories. You have groups that are using open source intelligence. I mean, it's overt, but by the time they're done with the process, they have uncovered covert activities by corrupt forces, by Russian intelligence, all sorts of things. There are groups that are harassing Russian soldiers online on social networks, that are doing hacking themselves. So I think that's my big surprise that I in my work was to find just how many groups are operating. They very commonly, change names, change structures. They're engaged in so much activity. There is a very significant problem of scale. A lot of the things that I've talked about go on, there's just a few people doing it. So, is its impact huge or not? But I do, back to my point about vibrancy, I do think that there's a huge amount of experimentation going on and people are looking for good ideas.
Thanks. We already have first question from the audience, and we will be referring to that. But before we do, I have a question also to Ágnes related to what Tom just mentioned, this amount of experimentation, amount of innovation that you definitely experience and observe in the media, because media need to innovate themselves in Hungary and across Central Europe. And we have seen some interesting cases. What would be your highlights? I mean, the good and the bad again, looking at the success stories and where these things are going and at what scale they are successful, if there are.
Basically, I can say that the remaining independent media in Hungary is full with innovations. And on the one hand, they are business. So basically, they are business model innovations. Of course, it can be a question if it is really an innovation, since media just turned back to the original business model. And I don't want to be I don't want to give a presentation about media economics, but there is an economic term called two-sided market, and it means that the revenues are coming from the advertising market and from the audience market. It was the original model of the business model of the media. In the digital media scene, it somehow disappeared for a few decades, and the digital media companies tried to generate revenues only from advertising. And it became obvious in the last years and in the last decade that it is not possible at all. So basically they had to turn back and they realized that they need the audience revenues again. And we know the successful crowdfunding projects. It is surprisingly, it is rather successful also here in Hungary. So a certain segment of the society has a kind of awareness, and they are, or we are willing to donate the media, or we are willing to subscribe for the quality content. And it works despite of the obvious economic difficulties. So it is a good news. And of course, as Tom also mentioned, we have brilliant investigations here, investigative projects. And we already have a really high quality YouTube channel with a daily program in public affairs. It is a kind of political talk show, and a lot of people say that it is the new public media here in Hungary, because it is really valuable. And of course we have the independent news portals, and they do their jobs, and it is a good news in the current circumstances. So basically, I can say, and sorry, not to forget the local media, because we also have small local news sites countryside. So it is. It seems to be a normal media market. Of course, we know that it is not really normal because of the state distortion, but there are good projects.
So I would also name, so we focused here in your presentation on Hungary primarily, and there are some media startups that basically went from day one being, if not shut down, then taken over, to operating anew. So from Index to Telex, most recently, I think you can say this is an innovation. The established media like HVG that never had this model of direct revenues online, just advertisement, they started this. They started to charge for extra content, and seems that people are willing to pay. Yeah, but I think globally successful case is really in Slovakia, where we have seen a merger of tech IT startup culture with journalism. Then they can, I mean, globally successful case of how you build up audience, build up revenues, and scale up to become now one of the top media in the country. Of course, country of 10 million, still it's 10 million, and they have a viewership comparable to the main channels, long establishing much later, providing quality and daily news. Now, Hanna, looking at Belarus, what we have seen over the last months, especially, sort to say, but Belarusians were idle for years, it seems to be, and what woke them up was, of course, the horrific attitude of the public administration towards the pandemic, and also upcoming presidential elections, many other things as well. But it also exemplified the power of civil society connectivity, and the power of civil society somehow being in need of media. I mean, you don't have civil society really impactful on the political level, and civil society is influencing politics by definition. It's not just it's not just a separate box of the society and of the country. But it started to do that on the social media channels, and I'm not going to investigate why, because we more or less know why, how media are under, suppressed by the public administration. But I would ask how, and how Belarusians are embracing the technology and social media communication, especially I think we're talking about Telegram, right? So how this, you would say, citizen journalism is coming up on this, and how do they verify, how Belarusians verify also truth from disinformation that spreads simultaneously through social media?
Sure. Well, first of all, if I may, Belarusians have waken up for various reasons, not only because, well, obviously because of those attitudes of Lukashenko personally and the government in general, but also for many other reasons. And that's a trend that I've been observing since at least a decade, this gradual change and, society being kind of like more mature, and everything. It's because of generational changes, because of even urbanization, because of the level of education and everything, right? There are many reasons for this. That's why I'm very optimistic about the outcome of this revolution. I think that the society has indeed woken up. So yeah, well, when it comes to technology, first of all, the greatest stereotype is that this revolution is being telegrammed. That's not, I think, the case. In a way, a telegram is just a mean, it's just a tool. I was in Minsk when there was a total blackout and we did not have internet at all. And we were just, I was a reporter, so I was kind of wandering around, looking for a protest, looking for people gathering in the city in August. And I saw other people who were doing the same, protesters were just looking for a mass demonstration because we could not connect and they did not know where something was happening. So this was not because Telegram channels told them to go out. They did not have access to Telegram. That's because they felt they were mobilized. They wanted to protest. So this is just not to ignore kind of the actual reason for people, for people being mobilized, not because of technology, but because you know, because they wanted to protest against Lukashenko. Technology, nevertheless, is very important, and it has provided a platform for people to share their opinions, to share their voices, to communicate, to get united. And I think that's one of the reasons why this kind of wave of protest is more successful than those previous ones, because of the internet penetration, because people saw that they are the majority right now. 10 years ago, when in 2010, when there was a huge protest in Minsk, not so many people knew about that outside the capital. So that's not the case anymore. Protests took place in many regional towns and cities. What's important is that that was obviously a platform for self-organization, yeah, as I said, communication, but also kind of it's important because the Belarusian society is atomized. So what Telegram did and what social media did, they've kind of strengthened those horizontal links between the population, between the people. Lukashenko has been successfully destroying these links. He has devastated the Belarusian political and civil society landscape. So Telegram and social media were kind of changing and have changed, I think, a little bit this trend. So that's one of the most important outcomes. It's kind of very interesting for me to see whether these energy will become something more, whether these groups that were created on Telegram channels would be able to kind of expand their activities and, for example, elect their own leadership, kind of engage in a more political way, elect people to resolve local problems, local matters, or they would unite and kind of become a political power. They would negotiate with the authorities. So that could be an important step towards creating a stronger civil society organizations in Belarus. As, for example, in neighboring Russia, there are these local housing cooperatives that nominate and support candidates for local legislative bodies.
Let me follow up on this here, Hanna, because Simona Merkinaitev asks this question, following up also on the discussion from the same conference yesterday, asking about the nature of this stronger alliance between civil society organization and political activism or political parties that we've seen many places in the world, US example too. Do you see there is a new alliance forming, and was it necessary to be formed, or maybe not necessary to be formed, between the civil society and media to there is a self-awareness or not of civil society as a whole or in their particular activist groups that the media are necessary and they need to be, created, supported, developed, upheld. How does it look from your perspective and Belarusian perspective?
Well, we have to be united. We have to create alliances. Otherwise, I think we would not be able to survive, because again, it's a war basically against civil society, against people right now in Belarus. Let me just give you one example. There was this, and there still is this fundraising campaign by Help. So they were able to raise over $2 million in just a few days from the diaspora, from Belarusians living abroad, from Belarusians inside the country. And this project or some similar kind of crowdfunding campaigns were able to support journalists, were able to support local initiatives in local neighborhoods, support people who have lost their jobs. So it's kind of, despite those fundraising campaigns currently lacking a solid institutional structure to obviously process and effectively distribute the money that they raised, there are some difficulties, but nevertheless they kind of do support people on the ground, and kind of people support people. I think that's a great kind of this solidarity is also the main outcome. And again, for me, it's kind of important to see whether this is going to be institutionalized and how this will kind of develop and what will be born out of it.
Yes, thank you. And with this question, I go to Tom. Tom, what's your reflection on this? How much of the civil society alliance with, civil society groups and the media are we seeing? Also looking at the US, not only in Central Eastern Europe, how much of it has been in the past?
Sure. Well, we know in the US that civil society is very liberal democratic civil society. There's another civil society too, but the democratic civil society is very sympathetic and has some of the same goals that some of the more progressive news media do, for sure. Although, as I say, there's this great angst within the US news media about to what degree news media should be openly political, because we still have this debate over objectivity. But I would say in general, in the US and elsewhere, there are a lot of prospects for coordination between civil society and other interest groups, environmental groups. The Greens in Germany have had their position on Nord Stream pipeline, social justice groups, women's rights groups, workers' rights groups. I think we've seen some of that in Belarus, minority rights groups, patriotic groups. I'm thinking here of the Lithuanian Riflemen's Union, for example, which is a very patriotic organization that is supportive of the government. Perhaps the more controversial question might be whether there's any prospect for finding common cause with religious groups. Sometimes in East Europe, we think of religious groups as being predominantly very conservative. But, are they all? And religious groups, even if they're conservative, might still be, in favor of compassion, for example, toward refugees, or having people not beaten down in the streets. Even in Russia, we've seen some people and some Russian Orthodox priests siding with protesters. So that's a question that interests me a lot. I'm certainly interested if any of the panelists have any thoughts about connections with religious groups, if they've been shown to be allies in any connection that they know of.
Oh, that is a fascinating question, and indeed we should not forget, at least from the point of view of Poland, where the Catholicism is living through its perhaps most difficult times in history because of many scandals unfolding. Still, this is the largest civil society organization in the country, with a lot of different media outlets and shades of the public standing on different issues.
And it played a pretty significant role in the Cold War too.
Oh yeah, historically too. But if you look to the current projects on the political scene, even, you have a Catholic activist leading the liberal party opposition, who is scoring second, and even once in the opinion polls scoring as the first ahead of the governing party. So multifold question, and indeed a very interesting one related just to civil society and media. But let me jump to next questions, because there are already two waiting in our chat. Lucia, and hopefully we'll come back to that. That definitely something of our focus coming up also for Central European focus in Visegrad Insight. Lucia Korcogova, UCSIA Brussels, asks a direct question to Ágnes Urbán. Ágnes, Lucia starts by saying she's Hungarian from Slovakia who studied in Czechia. Well, she's missing Poland to complete her V4 degree, but Visegrad format, let's say. But her question is related to the thesis she's working on specific question relating to Index. Index is the portal that was taken over by, a proxy, a businessman who is a proxy to political interests of Viktor Orbán, and then editorial team left and set up a new telex portal. Now, the question is, what kind of changes do you perceive in its function now? Meaning that the Index portal still remained operational in place. in terms of quality, political orientation, popularity. So in a way, what happens to media that are emptying themselves of the civil society energy, you would say even constituency in a way, and they are becoming purely political agents of the governments or ownership?
Yeah, I jumped to the index story, but before that, let me give you a remark about the previous round, the ally between the media and civil society, because it has a special Hungarian aspect, I think. And in Hungary, after 2010, when Fidesz came to the power, a lot of brilliant experts were squeezed out from the public administration, and they found their place partly in the academics and partly in the civil society. So the Hungarian civil organizations are full with brilliant experts, and they give regular expertise to the free media. So there is a special strategic alliance between the civil society and the independent media. And it is really sad that this kind of expertise cannot be used in the public administration in these years, because the expert background is really high quality in the civil society, and of course I have to add also the independent think tanks. And concerning the index story, I'm not really sure that everybody knows the background, but shortly saying, we had a market leader news portal, Index, and after difficult and really complicated changes on ownership level and in the whole ecosystem of the Index background, basically it was conquered by government forces, and a pro-government businessman became the owner of the whole Index holding. And this pro-government businessman is really well known in the propaganda media. He was basically the main figure in the last years in building up the propaganda media background for the government. So the newsroom and practically the whole staff of the Index decided to resign last summer, and they launched the new portal Telex, which seems to be rather successful, and the business model is crowdfunding. And the Index is absolutely interesting now because it is not a propaganda news portal. We have a lot of propaganda media in Hungary, but Index cannot be called propaganda. There is a kind of journalism. It is interesting to see that that some of my friends used to share Index articles on the Facebook. Those people who wrote a few months ago that they will never read Index anymore, and they will never click on the Index anymore. They just share Index articles because they are somehow interesting. But it is easy to recognize that there is a kind of change in the editorial practice. It is much more friendly with the government than the previous really independent newsroom. In some topics, they follow the government communication. I don't say that government propaganda because it is much better, but they follow the government approach. And it is also interesting that they have a lot of interviews with government politicians, and it is somehow surprising because so government politicians only gave interviews to the propaganda media in the last decade. They never gave interviews to the independent media, and the index is somehow in between, so it is not propaganda and not independent. So they have a special status right now. Personally, I'm not sure that it is sustainable in long run. So I think it is just a special period in the life of the index. But they try to do a kind of journalism, but they are much more loyal to the government than the really independent news portals.
All right. Thanks for answering this question. I think we got now better informed of the dynamics of what happens once a medium is taken over. It doesn't disappear, right? It has its life, and there's more to be studied and explained. Now, there is another question coming from Kamil Jarończyk. He asks about the prospects of polarization. As we know, there's political polarization, but also civil society overall campaigns or is active on sometimes very polarized issues. Tom was mentioning that there is civil society. I'm not sure that is really, it's possible to qualify who is civil society and who is not civil society if they don't agree with one another. And it's an interesting question to explore how much of this activism, when you relate to media, may bring also polarization. So this element of what you've been already describing is happening, that media become, you wouldn't say maybe partisan, but they define their stance on political ideology much more clearly, and they tend to sideline with a particular political opinion rather than strive for something of a balanced view. So, do you think this new world of crowdfunding, of social media, of civil society, which is so much more based on emotional aspects of emotional attachments, of emotions that puts the people behind successful crowdfunding campaigns. Do you think this is bringing prospects of more polarized media after all, if these are the trends, and if civil society is, because we were trying to more or less to paint a rosy picture of civil society working together with the media and building up the media, but is there more of something to be worried about also, this element of polarization, that otherwise for democracies seem not to be working so well? What do you think? Anyone? It's an open question. Okay, Ágnes, yes. You need to unmute.
Yeah. Yes, my experience is here in Hungary. The crowdfunding really increased the polarization, in a sense that communities are built around the media brands. So the audience became community. The passive audience became active community, and this kind of activism and the self-identification of the media users really led to a kind of polarization, and of course the politicians. Exactly, Viktor Orbán had this process when he called Index, the previously mentioned Index, as a fake news factory. It was about 3 years ago. Index was a really independent news portal at that time. So it was a kind of, so he put index to the political map, and he became, so he did obvious several times that that he has, or he considers that some independent media outlets are enemies for the government. And of course, yes, it is a kind of polarization.
But did they didn't pay him to do that, right? I mean, they didn't, because I mean, obviously that generates supporters and viewership, and it's a free advertisement, right? Otherwise,
yeah, in certain sense, yes, but I don't think that journalists are really happy because of this development.
Yes. So again, the question of polarization, I mean, that polarization gives the boost and helps media crowdfund, the bond with the civil society. But should there be limits to that? What's your opinion? What's your take, Tom?
Well, you know, thinking of polarization, it is helpful in many ways. I mean, I think one of the reasons that in the United States that the liberal news media have done so well financially is that liberal people are contributing huge amounts of money to them, so they're getting wealthy out of their politics. And of course, there are people in Central and East Europe who are getting wealthy out of their politics. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not on the Democratic side. I think that one thing that comes to mind with regard to polarization is whether pro-democracy forces need strategically to take a position of reasonableness, and on the one hand, on the other hand, fair thinking, reasonable discussion, reasonable argument. And if that can be successful against, you know, hysteria and false information and the whole panoply of destructive forces that we see from corrupt anti-democratic circles. Certainly there is always going to be room for reasoned discussion and honest news media. And, you know, we have that in Central and East Europe in many places, and that should always be encouraged. But alongside that, on the other side, should there be a more attack-oriented element of civil society that is really, you know, takes the gloves off and really uses very aggressive techniques? Now, I think we should exclude disinformation. I don't think any of us think that the pro-democracy side should generate disinformation, but I think they should always tell the truth. But there's a lot of truth to tell, and you can tell that truth very aggressively in a very attractive and humorous and sarcastic and snarky way too. So this is a big strategic question, I think, for democracy forces. Do we want a really tough pro-democracy ally that takes the gloves off, or do we think that ultimately that is worse for society and that somehow reasonableness will win if we just stay reasonable?
Excellent points, Tom, and thanks for highlighting those. Taking gloves off. Yes, in a way, the media the medium that is used for propaganda have taken gloves off a long time ago. I mean, the authoritarian side of the spectrum, simply speaking. So why not? Why to pretend that we still do sort of balancing view, which is easy prey, as we have seen very often for PR activity or for the propaganda outlets, or as we've seen during the Ukrainian war, that how BBC format of balanced view reporting has been exploited. Well, frankly speaking, not only by Russians, but by predominantly on that side by distorting the picture to that extent where the balance would shift with this kind of school of journalism. So very interesting question, and thanks also for highlighting that. Hanna, I believe you have also a story to tell here, how people in civil society and media, in the absence of institutional media, well, not maybe complete absence, because Novi Čas or whatever other, the Nasha Niva, they still exist in Belarus, but definitely we see the high point perhaps of civil society mobilization in Belarus, and for what kind of media they're striving, what sort of, and we know Belarusians otherwise as very decent and calm people. So do they want more aggressive, gloves off type of media?
Well, if I may come back to this question about polarization, actually, I just have a few points, and it's some sort of related to what you've asked about. Well, people now, it's important, I think, to understand that there is polarization in Belarus, and I think it's growing, sadly. And that's something that I've been thinking about in the past months, especially. I think people are now, there is a huge line when it comes to ethical values. So this is not only about Lukashenko, this is not only about his rule or the government or whoever is in power right now. This is about ethical values. And there is no chance that two sides would get a common ground in a way. And that's sad, but that's also kind of logical, right? That's something understandable. As much as one side is united in solidarity, which I mentioned, the other side is also kind of united because of this, anti-solidarity, or how to say that. I think there is a solution, and there is something that I would see media and society striving for. Now, creating a culture of respectful debate is not easy because it's an authoritarian country, an authoritarian environment, but a discussion on of different options for Belarus in the future should begin now rather than after Lukashenko is gone. And I would love to see media discussing it now and focusing on this now. And that's the role of think tanks, of media, that they need to focus at the moment. Because that's something, transformation, when look at fighting with Lukashenko, against Lukashenko, is not kind of the end of the story. Real transformation, social and political transformation is important. So here I would see the role that media and think tanks, human rights organizations should play. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's something that
maybe. The debate is on. The time is up. We don't have the final answer. This is not about concluding with an agreement, but exploring the avenues of the civil society and media renewal and centrist in Europe and frankly across the world. And I'm most thankful for all of you, Hanna, Ágnes, Tom, for joining us, and to people who participated as audience, listened to that and gave us comments or questions for the debate. That was very useful. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure. This also is, as I said, we're reaching this 1 hour long discussion end now, and we're continuing to debate this issue with lots being said about the economy of media and the tech behind the new media and civil society that connects to this renewal. The renewal wouldn't be even perhaps possible if these things were not reinvented for the civil society or by the civil society and the media. So following Netflix model, media are also discovering that subscription all of a sudden, something that gave them fuel at the very beginning. Hundreds of years ago, the people subscribing to media now is coming back in the digital form. We had excellent questions for next debates about the role of emotions, religion, and religious civil society that remain to be still pondered on, and then we should definitely come back to these questions for Central Europe and their role in the civil society and the role in the media. there is a lot to explore. We only started with a few texts recently at Visegrad Insight, so I also recommend some religion focused text, and a lot of reflection comes across the Atlantic. And thanks so much, Tom, here for your insightful analysis that brings together the trends that we're thinking about mostly or living through in Central Eastern Europe, and telling the story of what's the state of U.S. developments and how it may be impactful on the trends here. And so for all of you, thank you so much. Have a good afternoon and evening, and we'll be in touch later.
Thank you. Thank you.
And do subscribe to Visegrad Insight. I shouldn't be shy of saying that at the very end. Visegrad Insight is also subscription basis for students. You have options for students where it's not necessarily a donate. It's more of a donation service, but otherwise individual monthly subscribers are growing, and we're very proud of them as well.
And I recommend the Visegrad Insight podcast too.
Thank you, Tom. And Tom has been on the podcast, and we definitely hope to see him again. Okay, good. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.